All right, today I want to talk about externalizing anxiety. So I think it can be really easy to fall into a thinking pattern that you are anxiety, or that if you have anxiety, it's just inherently part of you. I even have clients sometimes tell me that they are an anxious person. And that's not really the case. Generally speaking, anxiety is a nervous system response and a thinking response to situations that are around you. It's not necessarily a personality trait or an innate kind of characteristic. So when I talk about externalizing anxiety, what I mean by that is getting you to have a vision of what anxiety would look like if it were an actual, tangible, physical being. And I call that the anxiety monster. And so for today's assignment, I want you to think about what your anxiety monster would look like. This is the monster that's showing up in your head, that's showing up in your day-to-day life, that's whispering in your ear, these things aren't going well, or that nobody's gonna like you, or they must be talking about you, all these messages that the anxiety monster tells us. I want you to imagine what that monster looks like. And so that might be drawing a picture of it. That might be closing your eyes and doing some imagery work of it. You might Google monsters on the internet and see if you find a monster picture that looks like what you think your anxiety monster looks like. But get a sense of what an externalized monster, something different from you, would look like. And then as you're talking about anxiety and you're working on anxiety, continuing to think about your anxiety as an external kind of its own thing is going to help you use a lot of the tools to help you manage that anxiety. It's hard to fight a battle against yourself. It's hard to be fighting against yourself if you feel like anxiety is just who you are. But if anxiety is something that's external, that has happened to settle in on you, then that makes it easier to fight. Anxiety is not your essence. It is not your core. It is not who you are. So you're going to draw him, give him a name if you want, or her, or they, whatever your monster may be, gendered or not, doesn't matter. I've had people tell me that their monster is like a little spiky, mean dog, and I've had people tell me their monster is like a big pile of smelly poop with flies all over it. Some people feel their anxiety monster is really big and huge, and I think that, so getting that vision is good, but I also think that can change over time. So if your anxiety monster right now is really big and overpowering and it's just all consuming, and over time you do work and it turns out that your anxiety monster is now kind of this smaller little mad guy instead of this big looming guy, as you fight anxiety, your anxiety monster may shift and change and hopefully shrink and get less powerful. So as you're imagining, be as detailed as possible. Think about all your senses. What does your monster look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? What would it feel like if you touched it? Really get into it, because what you're doing is you're getting in the enemy's head, right? Like you're getting into understanding anxiety as an enemy so that you can fight him in the best way that you know how. So once you've got a good sense of your anxiety monster and the externalization of your anxiety monster, then you can start thinking about fighting it and kind of kicking its ass. We're talking about anxiety as an asshole. You got to kick its ass. So for example, that might look like, instead of you feeling like, oh, I'm anxious today, instead of thinking that, feeling like, oh, well, anxiety showed up on my doorstep and walked in, and anxiety has inserted himself where he is not welcome, and I have to figure out how to get that gone, get him out. And so then you're not thinking of anxiety as definitive, as embedded, as impossible to change, but instead that it is something that can be addressed, that it's something that you can do something about. I think the most important piece of all of this is that when you have an externalized monster and it gives you some hope and it gives you something to battle against, it's really releasing you from a lot of these restrictions that anxiety has put on you, and a lot of the changes you've made to accommodate anxiety, so you don't go out as much anymore, maybe you don't make phone calls anymore. The things that you've given up to accommodate anxiety, once you start fighting anxiety, you can start setting your boundaries again and saying, no, I'm not anxiety. You're not going to tell me that I can't do these things. I am going to do these things, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So externalize your anxiety monster. Send me a picture of it if you draw one. I want to see your monster. I want to see it, and I want to understand it, and I want to fight alongside you. You can find me, of course, on Facebook and on Instagram and on YouTube, obviously. And you can find my website at drkarenmcdowell.com.